Thank you. So before we go into the first panel session today, I hope some of you had a chance to take in some of the artwork that's been installed in the gallery spaces and in the hallway on the main floor. And anticipating the panel coming up, I just wanted to mention a few works. Firstly, a durational drawing performance titled Mind Waves by Michael Zheng, which will be taking place intermittently today and probably tomorrow, maybe tomorrow, just outside the studio doors. And I'm sure that Michael will refer to that in this discussion. There's also an installation titled Bodhi Rose Mandala by Chrysanne Stathacos in the Ordain Gallery, just down the hall on your right, and I think many of you have seen that. And it's adjacent to a video work by Susan Stewart. And I'm just going to pull up my notes about Susan's work. It's called Bodhinath Stupa, Kathmandu, Nepal. And I think Chrysanne was looking at the practice of circumambulating the stupa as a social practice. And I also wanted to mention Mike Hulboom's video work that's installed in the sculpture gallery down the hall. It's titled Soft Animal Body. And seeing as we started the day with meditation, and I do recall James saying to soften the front of your body. Mike was supposed to be on the panel today, but unfortunately, he's busy receiving awards for his work in Europe and wasn't able to make it out today, but he did send us the video as a kind of film lecture. So the first session is titled Buddhism as Methodology, and I'm just going to read the blurb from the program notes. Examining a range of approaches to artistic practice, this panel explores the various ways by which Buddhism informs artistic inquiry, correspondingly considering the various meanings and interpretations of Buddhism in North America. This idea that artists draw on Buddhism as a methodology has been important for me in thinking about the relationships between art and Buddhism in order to deepen the way we think about and understand an art object by paying closer attention to the artist's intention and process in creating a work of art. And moderating the panel today is Kathryn Hacker. And I have to say, Kathryn has made such a huge effort to be here today, and I'm so appreciative. Kathryn's kind of been connected to this project from the very beginning stages and through all the processes of grant writing and all the thinking that you go through when you think that you're coming up with a crazy idea and doesn't make sense, and what am I talking about? So Kathryn has been there right through, it's almost like 3 or 4 years now. Kathryn Hacker is a Professor Emerita in the Department of Art History, Visual Art and Theory at the University of British Columbia, and one of the founders of UBC's Himalaya program. She's currently a collaborator on a 3-year SSHRC-funded transdisciplinary project focused on Nepal's post-earthquake reconstruction, and another ongoing project involving the visual documentation of endangered Buddhist wall paintings in the Kathmandu Valley with Pauba painter Lok Chitraka. So thank you so much, Kathryn.
So I'd also like to add my thank yous to Hema for conceptualizing and eventually curating this really exciting event, for bringing us all together today. And it's wonderful seeing it come to fruition. Over the course of our conversations in this panel, and indeed for the 2 days that we're together, we want to consider how Buddhism, or Buddhisms, as a paradigm of thinking and living, has generated new ideas and new movements in contemporary art, proposing new meanings and social purposes for art and artists. So I'm pleased to introduce the panel, the 4 participating artists for this panel. We have Kalsang Dawa, Chrysanne Stathacos, Dylan Thomas, and Michael Zheng. Born in Tibet, Kalsang Dawa apprenticed under 3 Thangka masters in Lhasa, and then completed a formal 7-year program in Dharamsala, India, under painting master Geshe Sangye, the personal painter for the 14th Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thangka painting is exacting. The artist grinds semi-precious stones to make pigments, to bring alive a sacred landscape of deities layered with symbolic meanings. The process is a meditation aid for the artist. The product is a meditation aid for devotees and patrons. Dawa specializes in the use of visual practices for healing, self-awareness, and interpersonal connection. He's been a faculty member at Emily Carr since 2004 and has exhibited his work at galleries and museums, including the Royal British Columbia Museum, STM Art Gallery at the University of Saskatchewan, and St. Norbert Art Center in Winnipeg. His prints have been sold at the museum, the Rubin Museum in New York, and the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and his paintings are in monasteries and private collections in India, Europe, Japan, China, Canada, and the US. Chrysanne Stathacos is a multidisciplinary artist of Greek, American, and Canadian origin. Her work has encompassed printmaking, textiles, painting, installation, and conceptual art. She's participated in many international exhibitions in various media, but she's most well known for her unique combination of performance and installation. Stathacos is heavily involved with and influenced by feminism, Greek mythology, Eastern spirituality, and Tibetan Buddhism, all of which inform her current art practice. The Rose Mirror Mandala series was originally created to be presented to the Dalai Lama in 2006 for his visit to the University of Buffalo, and was later included by A.A. Bronson in exhibitions including The Temptation of A.A. Bronson at the Wit to Wit in Rotterdam, and Stathacos presented 5 mirrors of the world at the Sculpture Park at Madhavendra Palace, Nahagar in Jaipur, which is currently on view. She is a founding director of Dongyu Gatsal Ling Initiatives, a nonprofit organization that works to help Tibetan Buddhist women practitioners in the Himalayas, inspired by the life work of Sunma Tenzin Palmo. Born in Victoria, Dylan Thomas is a Coast Salish artist and member of the Liaxun First Nation of Valdez Island. Through his paternal lineage, he also has heritage from Songsi and Squamish nations, and through his maternal lineage, he has heritage from Snemo and Stolo nations. Sorry. Thomas's early exposure to First Nations art prints ignited a lifelong passion for Northwest Coast art, and eventually led him to aspire to a career in Salish art. Dylan received training in jewelry work from the late Seltza and studied under Randy Cook and all mediums of Northwest Coast art. Thomas's artwork has been published in the Journal of Mathematics and Arts and was featured in the City of Victoria's Sacred Exhibition, which commissioned 3 pieces of arts and featured and is in City Hall's permanent collection. He's also extensively studied other forms of traditional geometric art, and his work has been deeply influenced by Vajrayana Buddhist mandalas, Celtic knots, Islamic tessellations, and many other ancient geometric art traditions. Michael Zheng is a conceptual performance artist who was born and raised in China and currently lives and works in San Francisco. Zhang's practice focuses on creating site-specific situations which question established positions and offers experiences into a new perspective. In 2011, he started practicing yoga and meditation, practices which have had profound impacts on his art and his personal life. His thinking is influenced by the interest in Chan Buddhist notion of the intrinsic nature of all things. Being present is at the core of his performances, photographs, videos, and sculptural installations. Zheng studied computer science at the prestigious Tsinghua University in China and had a successful career in Silicon Valley as an entrepreneur and computer software designer. He left his job to attend San Francisco Art Institute, where he studied with Paul Koss, Tony Labott, and John Roloff. He was also awarded a fellowship from Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, where he studied with Nari Ward and Zhu Bing. In 2017, Zheng participated in a research-based residency at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria in preparation for his contributions to this project in the present moment. So as you can see from my brief introductions to these four very accomplished artists, each is engaged with Buddhism, Kalsang, Chrysanne, and Dylan with Tibetan or Vajrayana Buddhism, and Michael with Chan Buddhism, reminding us of the very rich diversity of Buddhism. And so now I wanted just to set out a series of questions, points for our artists to engage with. And then at the conclusion of this, we'll have some time for questions from the audience. And I'm reminded to ask you to please use the microphone. There'll be one that will circulate to take your questions, all right? So then each of you is coming from different personal and cultural backgrounds to arrive at your practice of Buddhism. And so could you talk a little bit about your artistic training and how Buddhism became part of your artistic language? And so maybe I'll ask you, Kalsang, to start, to talk about your apprenticeships in Lhasa and Dharamsala. And then
Hello. Hi. Thank you, Kathryn. Why did you pick me first? Nervous here. I want to thank you for Hema inviting me and all these amazing artists, and to have the opportunity to share our mind in this great space, and Kathryn and the rest of your crew, and the university here. To start my practice, I wouldn't say I'm a religious in any way. I was born in a Buddhist family, and my grandmother used to take me to ancient monasteries, etc. And oh, by the way, I was born in Tibet. We were just missing the puzzle. And so she take me into those monasteries, and when you walk into these monasteries, you have the smell of this butter and a thick wall, and the butter lamps, and this ancient stuff that you're walking in. There's no words to really explain. And then you see these figures of those very dramatic and wrathful deities, and she often tell me, "Oh, look at these faces, and you have to remember these faces." And I was little, right? I was thinking they're scary. What are you talking about? And my grandmother always says, when you die, you will meet those people. I'm like, really, Grandma? I have to know that. I'm just born. But the funny thing is, in Tibet, the Tibetan Buddhists and the Buddhist practitioners, like all the Tibetans, are somehow working to their death, and so that they could have a very peaceful death and comfortable death, right? And that you could feel the death is part of nature. I'm actually slowly realizing that, like now I've been here for over 20 years, how much that it's disconnected with the people, and that even though it's such a nature thing that happens to everyone, but we are so fear for this happen to you, And there are so many of our people that I remember in Lhasa in Tibet, when they die and they want the little bless from their lama, and they're blissfully closing their eyes and I remember there was a time that what's his name, that Indian guy, he was talking about how the mind travels between when you die and the moment of what you thinking, and that's where it's going to take you. So if you're a creative person, artist, and it will take you into that realm. So you, like in a way that an artist, as a creative person, that we are actually building our own world behind ourselves, right? So those are like very far off and beautiful things to to talk about. And so, okay, coming back to my story, I'm always like, it goes off. My practice. I wasn't. I was very different. A student at the school, and it's built from the Chinese school. So I was very, rascal. It never really suits me, and it just never really worked. And they kicked me out from school finally. And I know, I know you guys want to hear something amazing, but that's the story. And I'm not dumb, but I'm just not settled. So when they kick you out, there's no second options, right? There's no other school to go. So you're out, and I was staying with my mom, and my mom was like every day looking at my face, and she was like, well, you can't stay here forever. You have to do something. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do painting. And I've always loved painting, drawing. And I know that something deep down that I have that, that kind of gift in me. And lucky enough, I first, my first teacher accepted me, and to do to have apprenticeship with him, and it's then like the school curriculums, and then you go like master and apprenticeship is very different, right? Like you actually for a little while you don't learn how to paint. You go, you make tea for him, you go for a little groceries for what he needs, right? It's old school stuff, right? Like, so you learn from, it's very interesting, honestly, that starting from 13 to right now, when I look back, and how much those reflections of those little things that I couldn't connect back then, but now it's so true that the mature you become, your art becomes better because you can connect those little things, the meaning of those things. Because we're always looking for meaning, right? We're always looking for the answer. And we sort of sometimes forget to breathe, and we don't count our breath, but we're like looking for our answer. And we're missing out our moment, right? So coming back to that, sorry, I'm just going off again. So I met my master from there, and then another 2 masters I've been through, and they always tease me, telling me like, because I grew up in a kind of a Chinese factory so they consider me a little bit of Chinese-ish because my attitude towards the things, and they'll say, "Hey, you, what is that? Big Xing, like, how do you say it? Because in Tibet we only eat yaks, right? Like anything else you eat, you consider to be a very, not very good, right? So they always calls me that, but it's a funny thing. Anyway, so I started that, and I always had this urge of wanting to leave Tibet. Somehow I was, born there, but I don't have that, that subtlety. And 1990, I finally, after many attempts of leaving Tibet, and I finally sort of gathered my last strength and worked a little bit and saved up a little bit money. Asked my parents, I'm going to leave because I don't want to be here. There's no future. My mom agreed, my grandmother, my father. And they agreed that if I leave, the risk is that probably I won't make it, and in the Himalaya probably you'll die. And back in the 90s, right? We don't have technologies developed back in Himalaya, so I literally left 1990 with 80 people, Tibetan people together, with a nun and monks, with a tough protest towards the Chinese. I've seen people dying in front of me. I've seen kids shot, like bullet in their face and fall into my friend. A lot of crazy stuff. And slowly I got into Nepal after 30 days of mountain climbing. And honestly, the day slowly when we found our road, and we're like, a lot of people crying, right? Because you've been working 30 days. It's like really tough enough. Now you see, like, you don't have to walk, and they just become so emotional. We have like 80 people together, like people age 8 under probably like 15, 6 people over 60 years old. And the funny stories between me, I mean, everyone had amazing stories. The funny story, that day, I was 19 years old, and I was fit. I was like, love soccer. I was very, and the day we tried to cross that night, and we got a message that the military, the Chinese military, is waiting for us, and we had to take a different route. So 80 people shuffled into 2 trucks, drove back into Lhasa, not back in Lhasa, back to into Tibet for 4 hours, and then they dropped us right behind Mount Kailash, which is a very sacred mountain for Tibet in India. I'm kidding you not. I so dislike that mountain. We've walked and walked 7 days. I can still see this mountain, right? I was like, what is this? And we're walking hard. I mean, and it was freezing cold. And the year that if you go 1 circle, it has like the equivalent of 13 circle, and we did the other way. So I don't know what that means, right? Yeah, I think it turned out it was good. Yeah, so we did that, and we have like Chinese military behind us trying to capture us. We have the Gorkha military in front of us that we're trying to pass through, and we chose the coldest year because they have a harder time to do the guard. So it was like everything against us, right? And we have to take chances. And every time we're crossing in the middle of the night and trying to pass through quietly, right? Like with 80 people with no lights, you imagine in the mountain, there's no quietness. It's just crazy. Anyway, slowly got into Tibet, slowly got into India. And then finally, I met the last Master Sankhya Yeshi, who is the appointed by the Dalai Lama, and he's been teaching for over 20 years, and he accepted me as his a student, and then I started from him. Yeah, so I should stop there. Yeah, it's like, absolutely. I don't want to take all the. It's exciting for me.
Hello. So just as a pre-note, I was in Victoria probably last in 1975, and my college friend Wendy de Bruyner and her father John de Bruyner taught here. So I want to remember them and dedicate to them whatever I might say. That time when I come from a Greek family, my great-grandfather was a Greek Orthodox priest. I always questioned the idea of the feminine within any religion. As a young 10-year-old girl, I questioned the priest at the Greek Orthodox Church, why the women couldn't go behind the altar. And because Mrs. Pappas went there to clean, so why couldn't we go? That question still connects with my work today, with my support of Jetsama Tenzin Palmo and the Tibetan Buddhist female practitioners in Tibet and in the Himalayas. And I have in terms of my social work, or social practice, I'm a founding director of Dongpo Gatsuling Initiatives, which supports 5 nunneries, both in India and in Tibet. That said, when I was here in 1975, I had a friend who was a draft dodger, and he thought I was sort of no good because I wasn't spiritual enough. So I was painting murals in Vancouver. And one day he said, well, why don't you come over for a few hours? Okay. So I went, and in this backyard, there was a man dressed in yellow and maroon robes, jumping up and down like this, with a woman, a Western woman, with a shaved head in maroon robes, watching him. I don't know if he hurt his foot or he was doing exercises, but it was the first time I saw a Tibetan person or lama or Rinpoche, and he promptly invited me for dinner. And at that point, I had a very big baby face. I'm a little older now. And went for dinner, and my friend, the draft dodger, was sitting next to me. The Western nun was sitting there, and the Lama was there. He looked at me and he said, what part of Tibet are you from? I said, what's Tibet? He said, you look like my cousin. I went, oh. I said, I'm Greek. My family's from Greece. And he looked at me and said, through the translator, what's Greece? And I said, what's Tibet? After that, there was a big kerfuffle, and we had to get into a car because he was going to do a teaching. And we came to a stoplight, and I said to the draft dodger, who was, I'm not going to say his name now because who knows, I could get in trouble. I said, stop the car. And I looked to the nun, and I said to her, it's not time for me to do this yet, because he was going to give a Dharma talk. And I opened the car door, and I ran. So that was the beginning of that. In the 80s, I was always interested in Asian art. You know, Alexander the Great, Gandharan bronzes, the connection between the Greek mythology and India and the start of Buddhism. But in the 80s, I have very good friends, the artist group General Idea, of which 2 members passed away from AIDS, and their friend Loine Rijers, who is well known for, she's still around in Amsterdam, and she connected the Dalai Lama to Andy Warhol to Joseph Beuys. And she has done amazing programs of connecting that. And she invited A. and Jorge of General Idea to Dharamsala to interview the Dalai Lama. I was very jealous, I admit. And they went, they met the oracle, they returned to Toronto, New York, and I said, oh. And then they were invited to when His Holiness would come to meet His Holiness, and one time I thought, oh, or go to the church where in New York, in Brooklyn, where His Holiness is speaking. So I went to this thing, I thought, because I never got invited to fancy things at that age, like they did, but not me. And then after the talk, I was like, oh, I was standing by a door outside the church. And no one was there, I'm just standing there, and out pops His Holiness. And I thought, I just want to shake your hand. So he shook my hand, and that was sort of the beginning. Now, during that time, in terms of what happened was that the Buddhism sort of interwove with the deaths of my friends of AIDS, of which there was a significant amount. My friend Jorge and AA were practitioners, but I would let AA, if he ever comes, tell that story. That's his story. And I went to India with AA after Jorge and Felix passed away. And that was a revelation in many ways. Not only the Buddhist revelation, because what happened was that from that trip, I've been to India and Dharamsala 12 times before. And the wish machine started with that, with the wishing trees of India, and I became very interested in the whole idea of like a public art project. And that sort of interwove with my beginning to look at Buddhism as trying to do a formal practice. In 1999, I went to Dharamsala to hear His Holiness's teaching and to also do workshops at the TCV school, because I'm an artist educator. And we went to this small place where my friend said, Tenzin Palmo's speaking tonight, and they were from Australia, and I said, who's Tenzin Palmo? They go, you don't know? And she's a Western Buddhist, one of the first Western Buddhist Tibetan nuns. She was born in London, and she's famous for having meditated in a cave in the Himalayas for 12 years. So, to make a long story short, that became the beginning of the practice. And in those times since then, after I heard Jetsama speak, all she said was, do you understand in this talk? And I thought, oh shit, I don't understand, I have to find a teacher. And that took me to Gaelic Rinpoche from Jewel Heart. So looking back at my art practice, whether it's the rose mandalas or the wish machine or all that, they are sort of interlock with that, but it's all based on the notion of understanding impermanence, understanding the feminine in Buddhism, because Buddhism came to me through a woman teacher, which goes back to the 10-year-old little girl. Not that I haven't attended teachings by His Holiness, or I haven't had male teachers, but I came to it from that. And that is also connected with my practice as an artist, being a feminist. So the exploration of the feminine through the work, whether it's a rose mandala, whether it's a portrait, whether it's a wish machine, or a painting, or looking at the heritage of my Greek mythology, which is what I've been focusing on in the past few years. But I think the biggest lessons or teachings especially from Gaelic Rinpoche, is Rinpoche always had a sense of humor. So I brought 2 of my books. You're welcome to come afterwards and look at them with me. And I was with Hema the other day, and I opened it up, and there's quotes from Rinpoche, and he wrote, the Buddha is a cleaning person. And I had drawn a bucket with a mop next to it. And just a couple years ago, I was participating with Documenta, and I said, I'm going to wash the steps of this one building where they had tortured people. So again, I was practicing the washing, the cleaning. Anyways, so that's the beginning of a few stories.
Goes this way. Hello, everybody. I understand the question has two parts. One is how did I start making art, and the second part was how Buddhism came into my art. I didn't come to art directly. I have two brothers, and one is a musician, one is an artist. And my first exposure to art was when I was very little. I found a book, must be left there by one of the brothers. It's a book of drawings from masters, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Unger, and so on. I remember feeling really impressed that you can actually draw something to look exactly like something. So that's how I started. I started just copying the masters from the book. And by the time I had to decide what I wanted to do, I was very confused because I was good at drawings and all of those things, but I was also very good at math. So by the time I took the national, I was born and grew up in China, and by the time I was taking the national entrance exam, I scored like ridiculously high, so I could choose to go to any school, any department, and I couldn't decide what I wanted. So I called my brother and asked him what should I be doing. He said, "Computer is the future. Go to computer." So that settled a big half of my life. So I went to computer and got a degree in computer science, and then I moved to the United States, and I worked in Silicon Valley as part of the .com and everything. It had a really exciting run, feeling like they're doing some important work in that sense. And all the time I was feeling there was something that I wasn't completely satisfied with, and I couldn't understand what it was. It came up once in a while. And in the end, it became clear that there was some parts of it that I didn't have this creative outlet in my professional part of my life. So at that time, it was really the heyday of the .com. So it was a huge decision on my part to how should I say it, basically to get rid of the golden handcuff, because the pay was good and everything. So I quit the job and joined the art school. And that was my first step to come to the darker side, I would say. The first few things that I encountered in art school kind of shaped what I'm doing now. I joined because I was good at drawing, so I joined the school as a painter. But within a year or two, I was kicked out of the painting, and I was told to join what they call the new genres department, where all the exciting work came from. I went to San Francisco Art Institute, so performance and so on. So by the time I graduated, I was doing performance art already. So that's what I continue to do until now. And then how the Buddhism came into my life was like this. My mom, my late mother, was a very devout Buddhist. Towards the later part of her life, I have memories of her prostrating several hours every day, and I was just thinking, well, this must be good for her health, because it's kind of physical exercise in some ways. So nobody stopped her. But now looking back, there was something that kind of stuck with me in how she did it. There was a sense of devotion that was palpable, and that power somehow had to do with the determination and persistence and the repetition of it. And now I look at it, it even has some performative aspect to it that kind of lends the power, which was very interesting. I think it has something to do with why I eventually become a performance artist. And but myself, my first exposure to Buddhism was actually when I was very little. My mother found a master for me. I don't know what kind of concept that was in China. She didn't tell me. The only thing she told me was that I found a master for you. And I couldn't care less like what that meant. And so I had no relation with that, with my master until I came to the United States. And the only activity that I had with that master was my mother told me that you have to send money to him. Okay, so now I kind of understand. The Chinese concept of that is that you build merit by sending things and so on. So that was like very, very early on. I had no real understanding of Buddhism at all. My own actual contact with Buddhism was very intellectual. It was actually after I became an artist, and it's almost kind of a contrary to how my mother practiced her Buddhism, which is kind of a religion. And for me, I came to it through scriptures, in particular the Diamond Sutra and the Platform Sutra. And they remain two of the most important writings in my life. I go to them because I keep going back to them because I always feel I don't get it. Right, so, and it is because of that quality I feel like it's so big that its wisdom encompasses a lot of other things. So that's my direct relationship to it. And my actual practice is actually through westernized versions of Buddhism, including yoga, meditation, and so on and so forth, which is really which is very practical. That I can do on a daily basis, and I can feel whether it's effective or not effective. And it is in that way my practice of Buddhism came into my art, through the practice of yoga and meditation. So the way it manifests in my art tends to have meditative quality in it, and I try to incorporate the form of meditation in my art. Later on, maybe I can speak to what I'm doing outside. It has exactly that kind of a thinking in it. And so without saying even more, I'm going to pass the mic to Dylan.
Hi, I'm Dylan Thomas. I guess... I wasn't actually planning on talking about this, but something Kalsang said kind of reminded me of kind of a really important thing that I experienced that definitely played a huge part of me getting involved in Buddhism, and that was when I was in my early 20s, and I was an atheist and kind of just a contrarian when it came to like traditions and things like that, and I had a handful of people who were close to me pass away, like uncles and my grandma. And seeing some of them pass away, I noticed when it was very clear that they were dying. Everyone knew it, and they were in denial. And it was so hard to watch someone just fighting it with everything they got, not fighting it in a way like they could beat it, but they just would not accept that this was happening. And that was like, really kind of terrifying to watch. And it had this, really rough effect on me as like a 19, 20-year-old. And then my grandma passed away. And when she was on her deathbed, I've never seen anyone go more peacefully. She was just totally okay with it. And when she actually, right before she passed away, she kept asking, "Are you going to be okay? Are you going to be okay?" And she was worried about us. And it was just such a mind-blowing experience that you could pass away that way. And I thought about that like every day for years. And subsequently, I started meditating more just for the mental health benefits. I tend to be a pretty anxious person by nature, and so I had gotten into meditation and was enjoying like a daily practice of just like kind of observing my breath. And then I wanted to kind of go deeper with it, and was trying, because I had this kind of aversion to religions, I avoided kind of Buddhist books at the start, and was reading all these kind of secular, like more contemporary books. Eventually just started reading some of the Buddhist books, and I realized really quickly that more than just like soothing my anxiety, that it would probably, they dealt with questions like how to die peacefully and how to live a life that, just it went way deeper than what was happening when I was originally meditating. So I ended up practicing with a local Zen center for a bit, and I've kind of practiced with a few sanghas through the years, and kind of more formally at sometimes and less formally at that, but I've continued to meditate almost every day since I've started, and it's been a huge part of my life. I can't imagine living without it now. And even when I am kind of not as involved with a sangha at the moment, it's still the philosophy has guided me through, minute by minute kind of thing. And well, when I had started getting interested in Buddhism, I also, at the same time, had been, my art career was starting to go as a traditional Salish artist. And Salish art has quite a lot of geometric and like forms of symmetry, like rotation symmetry and reflection symmetry and those kind of things. And somebody had said to me, they were like, have you ever, because I had done this piece that had a lot of reflection symmetry, and they said, have you ever seen a Tibetan mandala before? And I hadn't at the time, so I went and like looked it up, and I was just like blown away. And the image that's on the tote bags here for this conference was the piece that I did like directly after that. And through that kind of sent me on this really long, like 2-year kind of studying all forms of geometry from around the world. So like it said in my bio, like Celtic knots and Islamic tessellations have been a huge influence on my work. And that was how I kind of got started with with Buddhism, and I eventually even started practicing with a Vajrayana lineage here. And it was actually the art came first, because I had practiced Zen, which is at least aesthetically the complete opposite of Vajrayana Buddhism, like very minimal, everything's black. And then I stepped into a Vajrayana, and it was just like, whoa, there's colors everywhere, there's art all over the walls, and it was very different, but I really enjoyed it. So I guess on a deeper level, I think that it's really influenced my art, just my meditation practice. And I realize now that I really tried to control my art. Like I had an idea, and I wanted to make the artwork fit what I had envisioned at first. And through meditation, I really don't take that approach anymore. Like if I'm doing a painting and it's starting to take a direction that I didn't envision, I really embrace that because I find that when I'm trying to get too involved in my art instead of letting it unfold naturally, I think the work suffers. And I feel like having that approach change was a very big change in my art for the better. So yeah, that's what I got. Thanks.
Next question basically follows up very nicely on what Dylan was just commenting on in terms of his engagement with the mandala. And again, thinking about Buddhism as part of one's artistic language. And I was thinking about David Gordon White, who has this very evocative description of the mandala as an energy grid that represents the constant flow of divine and demonic, human and animal impulses in the universe as they interact in both constructive and destructive patterns. And he also talks about the mandala as a mesocosm, mediating between the great and the small. And so I wanted us to talk a little bit about these key concepts and forms. Certainly the mandala being very present in Dylan's work, in Kalsang's and yours, Chrysanne's. Also, in addition to that, the Dharma chakra, the Dharma wheel, and just to think about the new meanings or applications of these very resonant forms in contemporary life and in your art practice. So again, just to ask people to comment on this, and hopefully you've all been noticing this constant loop of artwork, and you'll see, you know, Chrysanne has this rose mirror mandala. Dylan's work, yeah.
Okay, great. That's a great question. How much time do we have, actually? Is it 15? Each of us, 15? Oh, okay. See, we like carried on our story, so we left the meaning of the two things behind. Are you talking about Jack Guar? Is that the mandala that you're referencing? Yeah. I remember 20 years ago when I came to Victoria visiting Victoria Art Gallery, there was a big show with the Canadian artists who've been to, India, spent a lot of times learning Tibetan art, and he came back and did these amazing mandala. Jack Weiss, right? And I was quite impressed. Yeah, hey, you know him? Okay. I'm going to wrap it up really fast here, okay? Mandala is a fascinating area. It's a time. It's everything. It's really about the male and female. It's about the round. It's about flat. Does Earth is a flat because you see it's flat? You're walking flat. Is it flat? If you go distant back enough, it rounds, right? So I think the expression itself, it's so vast. I've been teaching a mandala workshop for many, many years, and people are just expressing their own way. Incredible. I'm going to conclude this, okay? There's so much to talk about, right? Like, it's so interesting topic. Let me emphasize that, right? Like, my experiences of these 30 years, I truly found this is how I think, okay? It's nothing. I really recently find out, it's really not about the painting. Like, I've been painting all my life. It's not about the painting. It's about how I can use painting to find myself, to improve myself, to understanding myself, that how non-me that I can relate it to everybody else. That's what it's about. It's not about what you're doing. It's about something else, right? That's what I found. And there is a universal love that you have to reflect on your painting. So those are like simple, but it's so hard to gravitate because you have so much ego. So you have so much ego to not accept those ideas, right? Anyways, I'll stop that, but thank you.
So, okay, I'll backtrack a little bit with my first mandala works aren't actually the rose petal mandalas, but a series of paintings I made in the early 90s, imprinting condoms and making the condom mandala paintings. And they related to, again, the AIDS, using condoms and safety. And anyways, they've been looked at recently because they've become popular 30 years later. So, but anyways. But again, it sort of dovetailed after my trips to India. And I started the rose mandala started very organically with flowers on the ground. My mother always remarks that she remembers me as a young teenager going to the fields behind the house and coming back, picking a wildflower, and then coming back. And by the time I came back to the house, the wildflower was dead. So the rose mandalas started very organically. The first large one was in an exhibition called The Invisible Thread, which had numerous artists, and plucking each petal. And looking at it, and I've been making them for 20 years, they also relate to, the mandala isn't just, I do not believe it's just Eastern. If you look at ancient Greek, the mandala tiled floors with Medusa in the center part and different configuration in ancient times. The biggest thing I think is how we are interconnected, that and how the art we make and even the spirituality we do or practices are interconnected for us all, no matter who we are, what's our background. And the petals, when I make the things that strike me about making the large rose mandalas is each petal I pluck, I put around. One time I went to a gallery and the curator drew circles for me to follow. I went, no. This is a mindful activity. I place one. I don't have any circles drawn. I look and I put it down. Sometimes I say a mantra for each, Tara mantra for each petal, sometimes not. It depends. The mirrors in the center of the piece, like the one here, are, there are different analogies in Buddhist thought about mirrors and reflections. But also, if you look at Greek mythology, there's the mirror of Narcissus. So I play with both aspects of my Greek mythology, heritage, obsession, and also the Buddhist philosophical things about mirrors and emptiness. And the nature, the flowers or the Bodhi leaves. I always think that nature is a vehicle for compassion. So. That's for you.
Hi. Yeah, I really agreed with what was just said about, not even though Tibetan mandalas are what I studied the most, these kind of images seem to show up everywhere in the world. And I've always had this wild fascination with geometry and how nature just seems to take on these balanced structures. Like there's the reason that flower petals arrange themselves like circular with reflections and radial symmetry is because it creates this kind of a balance. And whenever I came across some geometric structure, it always kind of just hit me deeply, and it just instilled like a sense of awe about how the universe builds up into these crazy complex forms. And I thought the first time I saw a Tibetan mandala, I was just blown away. And that's the exact, I'd had that feeling lots through the years, but that was just such a perfect example of it, how you can just build up from something smaller and build until you have this incredibly complex thing that still is somehow in such a state of harmony. And I just think that that's such a good metaphor for how the universe works. And as they said, that the mandalas could be used as meditation aids. And I feel like even ever since I was a kid, I think that's what I loved about art. When I saw a piece and it was just like, everything disappeared. And I've like I said earlier, I've always been a very anxious person, except for when I was looking at art or creating art. And so I would, I think I'd call that spiritual now. I probably didn't for most of my life, but after, getting involved with Buddhism and things like that, now I find art is probably the kind of backbone of my spiritual practice. So yeah, I've been really grateful that I've been lucky enough to practice Buddhism and bring it in my art. And it just feels like such a gift.
I don't necessarily use any of the iconography from Buddhism to make my art. I'm more intrigued by the concepts, the ideas behind it. And just to make it more succinctly, by way of example of what I'm doing outside, I'm interested in, for this particular piece, the idea of being present and the actual practice of it. And so for that, each line actually took me, my photographer told me it took me about 10 minutes. It is because I wanted to copy a random line. The first line was random, and then the second line, I tried to copy exactly the twists and turns of the first line. And that turned out to be a super challenging task. It requires a lot of drawing skills and focus and just really being present, only copy the line in front of me, nothing else. No preconceived notion what kind of image I want to create in the end, and so I have no idea. And ironically, it actually creates, most of the time, very surprisingly interesting image because of that. So then, coming back to your original question about using the mandala and so on, I rarely make any references to it, except in this one. Coincidentally, conceptually, I do. In the process of making a mandala, because I actually was in a show with 4 Buddhist monks, they actually were making the mandala for the show, and I was so impressed by it. They spent 2 weeks, grain by grain, right, making it, and then in the end, I witnessed them going like this without any thinking. Seemingly, it's so impressive. It's like, because if I wanted to do that, I would have think, okay, now I'm done. So now I do it because I need to say something, right? And they just go like that. It blew my mind. So that concept impressed me. So it will be reflected in this piece. Eventually, by the end of tomorrow, you'll see probably there's something like that. So.
Yes, let's go to questions. I have many, but so who would like to? I think some of the things that I also wanted to talk about on here have been touched on in all of the one very much about process and about meditation and these techniques of the body. But is there a question? Several questions from the floor? Okay, right at the back.
Thank you very much for your discussion. I'm a feminist philosopher, and I've been working for a while on this question of love as methodology. And so I was really interested in the panel today, Buddhism as methodology, and I know, Kalsang, you mentioned universal love, and I'm just wondering if any of you, when you think of your methodology, if you think overtly as love, especially Buddhist love, as part of what impels your methodology with your work.
If I have to, I will say something.
You go first. Yes. Kalsang can be last.
Okay, so then briefly, I don't necessarily consciously make a work with the notion of art because it's such a huge concept. For me, it encompasses a lot of different aspects to it, including compassion and empathy and so on. So I had made work with those concepts more directly. Briefly, by way of example, I asked people to write down an episode in their actual life during which time they lost their temper, and later on they regret, right? And then I mixed them together, and then I randomly picked one and asked the people in the audience to reenact that. Now, when the person witnessed their own behavior being reenacted in front of them, nobody knows that he or she is a person. It creates a certain distance that you can observe your own behavior, which you don't like. And invariably, they find it funny and ridiculous that it's not me, but it is you. So to me, that has something to do with love in terms of its larger, how should I say, caring in that way. So anyway, so that's all I could say.
With the rose mirror mandalas, sometimes they exist for a week or 3 days. And at the Wit to Wit, the picture of me bent over with the mandala, which is a favorite picture, of people, working. that Rose Mandela existed for 4 months at the Wit de Wit in Rotterdam. And at the end of it, I worked with a youth group, and we talked about meditation, and then none of them had ever done a meditation before, and then for the finissage, we sat around and we blew it away with our breath. So the Rose Mandelas usually, at some point at the ending process, there's a dispersion of like the impermanence of even the beautiful, which if we look at our own bodies, and death is the impermanence of us. And sometimes when you're a certain age and you look at a photograph of when you're 20 and the flower of your youth, and you go, what happened? You know, I didn't think I was that pretty or when I was 20, but then you realize it's just a reflection of time and perception. So that's what the pieces are about in terms of Buddhism.
Wow. Buddhist. Oh. Do you want to go?
Okay.
Kathryn said I should go.
Oh, yeah.
I should listen to her.
Yeah, I guess I think that what we enjoy and what makes us feel good about love is that that breaking down of the barrier, like kind of the loss of the ego and being so engaged with another person that that there's no separation. And I think that's what the pleasurable feeling of what like love feels like. And I think, so there's lots of forms of that. There's like romantic and just, you know, like a mother and a child or any of those kind of things. And I think that, yeah, I always try and tap into that. And I can even have that same feeling when I'm doing art. And I find that my artwork, I'm only happy with it when I end up getting into that space where it's like, I'm not overthinking and I'm not trying to do too much, but more just having this like, this really short-term relationship with a drawing or a painting or anything like that. And yeah, it's hard to explain that feeling as an artist, but yeah, that has been just such a wonderful thing for me through my life. Like I since I was like a really young kid and I had attention issues and was a difficult child to deal with, I hear. And I just remember, you know, like when they needed me to calm down, they would just like, go draw, Dylan, and they give me paper. And I had all these weird things in school, like if I finished my work early, I was allowed to draw, and all of a sudden I was getting everything done on time and was doing well. And like, yeah, so even teachers were kind of tapping into that with me. So yeah, I think more on that kind of level of like universal love, like Kalsang said, but it's definitely why I do it, is that feeling of love that I get when I engage in art.
Do some mandala. You'll calm down. So the practice, I believe the practice of the painting is to, you have to improve yourself, what you are doing, right? That's why when you become a wiser or older, your artwork kind of grows with you, become a more mature. The concept of Tibetan art, like when we do Tibetan art, especially Buddhist art, we have to meditate for 3 months and to cleanse yourself. And it's not because the sacredness of yourself, but it's me kind of like potentially to become the closest of my highest of myself. So in a sense that when you're painting yourself, it's really a self-portrait of the god or the goddesses that you're painting. It's a self-portrait of yourself, right? It's a quality of the deities that carries, and that we carry both of those qualities. We have good qualities, we have ugly qualities, right? So that's why we have to transform them each other, right? We have a male qualities, we have a female qualities, because we are combined from man and woman, right? So This is the interesting part of the Tibetan Buddhist practice comes to, right? It comes to a two, that's why we always say male and females, right? And we often reflect a female as the wisdom holder who holds the wisdom, and then the male who is the method or trying to find, you need to have the method to utilize those wisdom to gain what you actually looking for, right? So that's the whole concept. So when it peels down and down and down to a practice, it really comes down to a raw place, right? Like a place that when you talk about mandala, it's talking about chakras, right? A chakras of where your places to opens up your most energy, exit in and out. And in a way, chakra, you can see, like even the place that my hair grow, that's a chakra too. But the chakra itself, more kind of straight into a center point, that comes to a more kind of a stronger channel up in and out path. So a lot of the practitioners, I remember a lot of the gurus, and they say when they practice chakras, and they have experiences 36 or 35 or 12 different chakras are open. So there is no particular one way we'll say Hindu have 7, we have 5. That's the beautiful thing with the spirituality. It's like many ways we all same, in many ways we all different. We all gifted in a different way. We all have a lot of things to work on. And that's the beauty thing with the spiritualities. Everything out there, it's there for you to explore. You are the sacredness of this journey, right? If you don't think you are sacred, you are foolish, right? If you don't be nice to yourself, you're extremely foolish. So this is your journey. So everything out there is for you to explore, right? And if you downgrade to that, then there's something wrong with your practice. Buddhism, it's talking about a now. It's talking about present, right? Right now. Let's forget the past, because the past is gone, right? What can we deal with it now? Like, what is the problem that you have? What is the emotional attachment that you have? What is the problem that you're facing that you have a hard time to deal with? Not that you can get rid of them because it's in you, it's real. How can you become a friend with it? Like, how can you accept it and then transform that when it comes, right? When that ego stuff comes up, you're like, oh, I know you're coming up, right? Okay, I'm not gonna, caught up with it. I'm gonna transform that into a different way. Like, you recognize yourself. Buddhism, it's exploration of opportunity of yourself. It's not about a religious, it's not about any of those things. It's really about opportunity to explore within yourself. And that Buddhism always said that you have the nature, the Buddha nature. You know what that means? You have the nature of awakened one inside you. And you have to wake it up. And waking up, it's your job to do, right? And that's what it's about. And everything else out there, yogas and paintings, walking meditations, all these things is a beautiful thing. It's really about understanding yourself so that you can find yourself very comfortable. I've never seen anyone, enlightened and flying around. But I've met a lot of comfortable people who are extremely comfortable within their skin. It's a good place to be, right? So that's what you should aim. And it's about time, right? It's about Buddhism, let's say. Okay, I'm gonna conclude that. So there you go. It is, yeah. What we said? Yes. Please do.
Thank you all so much. I just feel very inspired from being here. I was just curious as to whether something might just come to you that would be about a person, maybe in a different art field, a writer or dancer or scientist, or who comes to you who has influenced you in terms of your practice. Has influenced you, who you think, oh, that's a Buddhist. Well, no, who has influenced you? No, if there's, sorry. I'm not, it could be anybody who's a maker of art or dance or performance or writing or theater. Yeah, a question for everybody.
Okay.
That is there somebody who comes to your mind?
Okay, I'll do this very quickly. When I was in the show, the exhibition, The Invisible Thread, there were many contemporary artists. There was also the poet John Giorno, who I'd never heard of before. And at one event, John read his poem, The Bad Tree. And I recommend to everyone to read his poetry. He passed away a few weeks ago. And I was lucky to go to some of the fire pujas with Marcus Boone, who's here, will speak later. But The Bad Tree is one of the most remarkable poems that I've heard and read. So.
Yeah, I guess MC Escher might have been one of the earliest influences for me that especially is kind of outside of what I do. But yeah, the first time I kind of stumbled upon his work, yeah, I was just blown away by that. And he was the one who kind of ignited my passion for geometry. And that's been like a thread that's carried through my whole art career. And yeah, the way he worked with mathematics and all that, really, it was, I saw one print of his in a book, and it definitely really veered my life direction, because that just kind of hung on and really influenced everything I did since then. And yeah, so just, but yeah, yeah, I think that's all I got, yeah.
Should I say it quickly?
Yeah,
All right. I try to be cognizant of the time. I think it's 2:30, so we should wrap up. Dick Feynman is the person that I think of immediately. He's a Nobel laureate for theoretical physics. The reason that he impressed me so much is that his way of dealing with science is through intuition, which is just the concept itself is mind-boggling, because science is methodical and so on. But his way of dealing with things is always intuition first. Just think of how he helped solve the problem of Apollo 13. When that thing exploded, the rocket scientists couldn't find out why. They thought of him, say, let's ask him, because this guy thought outside the box, right? Within 2 months, he found it. And I highly, highly recommend if you don't know it already, to read up on how he found the thing. It's like nobody, he needed not to have known rocket science, but he knew how to find the problem. And that, to me, is like a person with a real wisdom. You don't have to have the knowledge, but you have a methodology that can help you find that something, it can solve a lot of problems. So that's my thing.
Yeah, method and
I think you're closing it.
Oh, I'm closing. Okay, I've been always said, because I'm an immigrant. And 20 years ago, when I came to Canada, I noticed like, oh, Canadian man, they don't know much of art. They just love Group of Seven, landscape people. Boring. They don't have much of But after 20 years, I must say my biggest influence is really the landscape of where I'm living. Right, I'm trying to find the God and the goddess within the simple things, and the simple things that reflects a non-you. Right, like you. We're talking about emptiness, right? Emptiness. you can't pinpoint yourself as you, that you are all surrounded of everything that influence you, all the nature phenomena and that support you, that you are who you are. So that like concept of emptiness, and I just trying to find that little things, that is trying to find a meaning out of those little things. And those little things, actually, like most of the times, I'm at West Coast and Vancouver, beautiful place, and trying to find meaning from, like tree leaves, and like trying to find God from qualities from simple things. So that's my sort of a next step, because I've been doing God and Goddesses painting for all these years. I was getting a little bit much. It's true. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. We're going to take a break for about an hour, and we'll reconvene. What's the time now? We'll reconvene back at 3:30. There's tea and coffee outside, but Chawei Tsai is going to do a performance in the hallway. So you'll see it outside. Chawei will be participating in the next panel, and she's well known around the world for her project centered on the Heart Sutra. So it's a version of a piece. She's going to be doing a version of a piece that was recently performed at the South Bank Centre in London, England. So I invite you to stretch your legs and go get some coffee and enjoy Chawei's performance, and we'll meet back at 3:30.